Hello and welcome. So, today we'll be doing the part 2 of the living world. Now, we have already studied about the different characteristics of living organisms. We also saw why there is a need for classification. We saw the meaning of taxonomy. We also saw the taxonomical hierarchy, their definitions, and we also saw some examples. Now today we are going to be going further with the taxonomy, and we are going to see that the taxonomical hierarchy called domain, the first taxonomical hierarchy which we have studied, if you remember here, this was the first taxonomical hierarchy that was there, domain. We are going to see this domain in details. We are going to see the different types of domains that is there. Now these types of domain were given by Carl Woese. He was the first person to differentiate the living organisms into three types of domains. The whole lot of living organisms that we can see, the whole biological diversity was divided into the three types. This is the domain Eubacteria, domain Archaea, and domain Eukarya. Now, here if you see, whenever we are classifying something, like in systematics, we have seen that it means we are going to be classifying it on the basis of some characteristics. So what were the characteristics on which this classification was done? Now the classification for the domains were done because of the on the basis of rRNA sequence, on the lipid structure, and the antibiotic sensitivity. Now first of all, what is the meaning of rRNA sequence? We have already heard about DNA in our lower classes. Now this is a kind of nucleic acid, but in the nucleus we not only have DNA, we have one more kind of nucleic acid, that is RNA. Now this RNA will be having a similar structure to DNA, but it is a single stranded structure. DNA is a double-stranded structure, whereas RNA is single-stranded in nature. There are differences between their structures, but this is the most important difference, that RNA is single-stranded. There are many other differences, obviously. Now, RNA is of three types: the tRNA, the rRNA, and the mRNA. Now each of these types are there in nucleic acid chapter. We are going to study about them, but today we are going to be concerned with rRNA. rRNA is the ribosomal RNA. The full form of RNA is ribosomal RNA. RNA means ribonucleic acid. Now this kind of nucleic acids we have heard about that there is a cell organelle called the ribosome. Now, these ribosomes are made up of proteins and RNA. The kind of RNA which is present in ribosome is known as the ribosomal RNA. The sequence of the nucleotides of this nucleic acid. The sequence of nucleotides means, if I consider the RNA as say it is a structure like this, means it is like the necklace. Okay, let's take it a pearl necklace. These are the pearls. Now these pearls that are there, each of these pearls are known as the nucleotides. There are 4 nucleotides: adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine, and they are going to be having different kinds of arrangements in the ribosomal RNA, in all the nucleic acids, in DNA and RNA both. But since we are considering the rRNA over here, so we are talking about rRNA. In the ribosomal RNA, these nucleotides are arranged in a particular order. So that order is different in different organisms. So we are going to be distinguishing the different living organisms on the basis of their rRNA sequence. Next, we are going to see the lipid structure. Lipid structure of the cell membrane. Now we have seen the cell membrane, that every living organism has a cell membrane, right? So in the cell membrane, if I see over here, it looks like this somewhat. Now this, normally in your lower classes, if you have drawn a cell membrane, it was just a line like this. Okay, this was the nucleus and all other stuff was there, the protoplasm, and there was a line like this. This line, if I magnify it, it looks like this. This is a double helical phospholipid structure. This lipid structure determines how much a particular cell will be resistant or sensitive to its environmental conditions. So that's why it is important for us to study the lipid structure. So that's the reason we are going to be studying about the antibiotic sensitivity over here. So the lipid structure, antibiotic sensitivity is actually kind of the same topic. If I understand the lipid structure, I can understand why a particular organism is more sensitive to antibiotic or less sensitive to antibiotics. Now let's see the different types of the domains. These are the domains that we have seen over here. Now this picture has been taken from the V.B. Rastogi. So this is a picture that has been taken from V.B. Rastogi. Now here we are seeing the domain Eubacteria, we are seeing domain Archaea and domain Eukarya. The domain Eubacteria consists of the gram-positive, gram-negative Mycoplasma, Cyanobacteria and green sulfur bacteria. Domain Archaea consists of 3 types: methanogens, halophils, thermoacidophils. And the domain Eukarya consists of the 4 kingdoms: fungi, plantae, animalia and protista. So these are the different divisions or the different types of organisms that have evolved in these different domains. Now first of all, today in this chapter we are going to be studying about the domain Archaebacteria. We are also going to see the Mycoplasmas, which is a part of the domain Eubacteria. The other parts will be discussed in the later chapters. Now here if you see, this is the distinguishing features of Archaebacteria, Eubacteria and Eukarya. Why the Eubacteria is written as only bacteria, we'll come to that. Now let's see the first one, domain Archaebacteria. They are the most primitive organisms. They are more primitive than the bacteria itself. They were the first to come to the earth. Why? Because the primitive conditions of earth was very tough for living organisms to survive. But they had a very unique feature. They had a long branched hydrocarbon chain. That means their hydrocarbon chain was very complex. So whenever something is very complex, if we try to destroy it with heat or anything like that, it will be difficult. If a simpler substance is there, it can easily be destroyed with heat, but a complex substance takes time to be destroyed in heat. That's why these organisms are heat resistant, because they have this long branched hydrocarbon chains in their cell membrane. So if the cell membrane is tough enough, so obviously heat cannot penetrate these organisms or kill these organisms. Glycerol is present in all the organisms, so it is nothing unique. Next is obviously if it is resistant to heat, it can be resistant to antibiotics also. So that's all because of the tough resistant cell membrane that they have, the tough resistant covering that they are having. The domain Eubacteria is the second kind of domain. Now domain Eubacteria, the word EU, it means true. So these organisms are the ones which are going to be the true bacteria. That's why it is called bacteria over here. They are the actual bacteria that we have heard of. When we say bacteria, we talk about the domain Eubacteria itself. The domain Eubacteria or the true bacteria, they have unbranched fatty acid chains. So their fatty acid chains are not very branched, they are simple. So if they are simple and not very branched or not very complex, then they can easily be killed with heat. That's why we can kill bacteria by boiling or by heating substances. Next we have the effect of antibiotics. They are very much affected by the antibiotics, so they are not going to be very much resistant to it. They are going to be affected by antibiotics. That means they are sensitive to antibiotics, to be specific. Next we have the domain eukarya. Now domain eubacteria includes all those organisms which are not going to be having a proper cell nucleus. Now specifically if I say they don't have a proper well defined nucleus, that is they don't have nuclear membrane. So if they don't have nuclear membrane, the domain eubacteria consists mainly of the prokaryotic organisms because they don't have a proper nuclear membrane. Whereas domain eukarya consists of eukaryotic organisms. Again I told you, EU means true, whereas karya means something related to the nucleus. Alright, so eukaryotes are the ones which have the true nucleus, whereas eubacteria were the ones which had prokaryotes, that means the primitive kind of nucleus, that is without their nuclear membrane or not a well defined nucleus. Now they have a well defined nucleus. Next, this organisms will be having a cell membrane. Their cell membrane structure will be like, these are the cell membrane lipids that is present normally. Now in between the cell membrane lipids there are structures like this. Again there are cell membrane lipids. Alright, these structures are known as the membrane proteins. They are the proteins of the membrane. So these membrane proteins are present in between the lipids. So they are kind of sandwiched between the lipids. That's why it is known as the lipid protein lipid trilaminar complex. They are resistant to antibiotics. Obviously we need to be resistant. This includes us also. The eukaryotic organisms, we are also eukaryotic. So we have to be resistant to antibiotics, because if we are not resistant to antibiotics, then it is very much useless to have the antibiotic, because it can be killing our own cells. So the antibiotics are actually not going to be affecting our body cells. Next, here we are going to see the domain Archaebacteria. These are the three types of domain Archaebacteria. Now all these three types will be very much resistant to very harsh environmental conditions. Let's start with the first one, that is methanogens. These organisms can easily make their food by the help of carbon dioxide or hydrogen and acetic acid and all these things. They don't need something special, or they don't require anything extra to make their food. They can easily change this into methane, and that's how they are obtaining their nutrition. So they are obligate anaerobic autotrophs. That means they can make their own food. But one more good thing is they are obligatory anaerobic. That means they don't even require oxygen. They are obligatory anaerobic, means they have an obligation that they can't use oxygen. If they are exposed to oxygen, they are killed. So that's the good thing about them, that they don't even need oxygen and they can still survive without oxygen. Next we can see the different reactions. Now this thing is as a whole is not there in the syllabus directly, but it is good to know about the domain Archaebacteria. So that's why I have given, because it will be required in the competitive exams also. Now they are going to be forming CO2. Now this is a little smaller, it's looking a little smaller now. CO2, 4H2, the hydrogen will be forming methane and water. Similarly, they can also form methane from acetic acid. From where they are found normally in the cattle rumen. They are going to be fermenting cellulose for the cattle. Means they can easily break down the cellulose that the cattle take as a part of their nutrition. Means the plant digesting organisms. The plant cell wall consists of cellulose and it can easily be digested by the methanogens. Next we have the halophils. Now in the halophils, these organisms, they are the aerobic or facultative anaerobic. Means they require air They are aerobic, so they require air for their respiration. And facultative anaerobic means they can even survive without oxygen. So we can see that if they have oxygen, it's not a problem for them. If they don't have oxygen, still it won't be any problem for them. They can still obtain their nutrition, and they can still do their respiration and get energy also. They are heterotrophs or chemoheterotrophs, means they use chemicals to make their own food. They are going to be using the chemicals to make their own food. They have high intracellular salt concentration, which means the salt concentration, that is the pH in their body, is quite high. So their body cells are very much programmed to survive in a very high salty environment. They don't require a neutral or a acidic environment to survive. They can even survive in a very high salty environment. So if their cells are programmed in such a way that their enzymes can function in high pH, so it won't be a problem for them to survive in conditions where there is high salt containing areas. So that's the reason. So even the enzymes and ribosomes, here you can see, they are going to be functioning in high salt concentration. Anywhere, wherever there is high salt concentration, they can survive. Normally we know that salts can kill bacteria, but these archaebacteria, the halophils, they can survive in high salt concentration. Halo means salt and philic means love. So the word halophils means the salt loving organisms. Next we have the thermoacidophils. Now the thermoacidophils are aerobic or facultative anaerobic. Aerobic means again the same thing, that they require oxygen, but they can survive also without oxygen. They are not going to be killed without oxygen. Moreover, they are chemoheterotrophs, that means they can use chemicals to make their own food. They can live, they are thermoacidophils, that means they love heat as well as they love acid. So thermoacidophils means they can survive in high temperature, that is 80 degrees centigrade, and they can also survive in low pH, that is pH 2. So these organisms in archaebacteria, we saw now that they can even survive in higher salt concentration like in halophils. Some of them can even survive in low salt concentration in high acidic environment also. So basically these organisms can survive all these extreme temperatures, which makes them quite unique, because they are going to be surviving in any extreme condition, and even they can survive the extreme environment of the primitive earth, which makes them the first cells to exist in the earth. The examples are given over here, you can see them. They are also, the thermoacidophils are mostly found in the sulfur springs. So in the sulfur springs, if we see, they are going to be having high temperature also. It is acidic also sometimes, so that's why they can easily survive in this condition because of their unique property of their cell membrane. The archaebacteria survives in all these conditions because of their complex cell membrane composition. Next, this is a mycoplasma, is a kind of, we can see over here, mycoplasma is a kind of eubacteria. Here you can see mycoplasmas are a kind of eubacteria. So we have finished with domain archaebacteria. Now we have started with domain eubacteria. Alright, so now mycoplasmas are also not directly given in your syllabus, but we are just going to do it just because it is interesting to know about them. These organisms are the smallest living organism, smallest living cellular organism. I am not talking about the viruses. Viruses are acellular, but mycoplasmas are the smallest living cellular organism. So if it is said that which is the smallest cell, the smallest cells belong to the mycoplasmas or the PPLO, the pleuropneumonia like organisms. Now these organisms are Smallest because normally the eubacteria is going to be having a cell wall, but these organisms don't have a cell wall. So if some organism is not having the cell wall, their diameter is decreasing, because we are not considering this part. So the diameter decreases. That's why it is the smallest organism, because they are not having the cell wall. Now, since the cell wall is a very rigid structure, in the absence of the cell wall, the animals become very much flexible and they can easily change their shape. So they are pleomorphic in nature. Now, since they are not having a cell wall, neither they are having a proper nuclear membrane also. So without the nuclear membrane, they are having a naked DNA. So that's why they are normally considered a organism which is between viruses and bacteria, because viruses don't have a cell at all, whereas bacteria are going to be having cell but not a proper eukaryotic cell, a prokaryotic cell. So these organisms, mycoplasmas, are considered some organisms which are in between this, between viruses and bacteria. So here we can see it is just having a lipoprotein membrane, simple lipid and protein containing membrane. Even viruses also, we are going to see that they also have a lipoprotein membrane, most of them. Then the soluble proteins are there. There are ribosomes also, DNA which is naked, it is not covered with the nuclear membrane, and they have some soluble RNA. Now they are also aerobic in nature, that is they require air for their survival. They are prokaryotic in nature, that means they are not going to be having the nuclear membrane. They are resistant to antibiotics because that affects the cell wall. Now antibiotics are actually programmed to affect some of the cell organelles of living organisms. Now if these organisms don't have a cell wall, obviously it won't be affected by antibiotics which are going to be harming the cell wall. That's why they are resistant to this kind of antibiotics. Now we are going to see the different types of classification. First of all is the numerical taxonomy or the phonetic system of classification. The phonetic system of classification includes all those properties, like all those classification. Say for example, if I take two organisms and I find out how many similar features they have and how many dissimilar features they have. On the basis of this numerical data, if I am going to decide and make a classification on these two organisms, that is known as numerical taxonomy. Say there are 5% of similarities between two organisms and there are 95% of dissimilarities between those two organisms. So obviously they are not going to be quite close to each other, they will be far away from each other. Say there is one more organism which is very much similar to this organism. So we are going to be putting these two organisms together, but this organism and this organism won't be so close to each other. So that's the reason we can't be putting them close to each other, because they are not having so much similarities compared to this. So here also if you see, this is the branches that is shown. This is actually a phonetic system of classification that is shown in this picture. Here if you see that these two organisms, here we see the salamander and the lizard, they are going to be more closely related to each other compared to a deer or a pelican and a polar bear. But a pelican and a polar bear will be having more similarities amongst themselves. Whereas if I consider the salamander and the male deer, they are not going to be so much similar to each other, whereas the polar bear and this deer will be having similarities amongst themselves more. That's why they are going to be connected like this. So it is actually on the basis of the percentage of similarities that they are going to be having. Next we have cytotaxonomy. Here we consider the chromosomes that is there, the number of chromosomes, the relationship in between them, the percentage of similarities in between the chromosomes and the alleles of the chromosomes. On the basis of that, if I create a classification, we call that as cytotaxonomy. Next we have the chemotaxonomy. In chemotaxonomy, the chemical constituents are considered, and all those chemical constituents are going to be taken in consideration to make all the taxonomic classifications. For example, say the different biochemical activities that is happening, biochemical relations that they are having. For example, if someone is having someone can do photosynthesis and someone can't do photosynthesis, obviously they are not going to be very much closely related to each other. So on the basis of their all these biochemical activities that is happening inside the living organisms, we can classify them. Then we can see the cladistic system of classification. Here we are going to be considering the hierarchical order on the basis of their evolution, and to find out the evolutionary relationship we also need to study a separate branch of biology, where we just study about the fossils, the evolutions, the organs, that homologous, analogous organs and all these things, and we are going to be finding the similarities and dissimilarities between organisms, and then we are going to be creating a chart somewhat like this, and this kind of chart will be helping us to understand the relation between the organisms better. Next we are going to be seeing the binomial nomenclature, means how to write down the names of certain organisms. Like for example, the genus and species we have seen in the before slides. There we have seen that we just put the genus name first and species name in the second, because according to the chart and according to taxonomical hierarchy they should be like that. So here we can see the genus is first and species is second. So now here also in the binomial nomenclature, which is actually a common name for all the living organisms that is there, that has been identified till now. So we also we are going to put the genus name first and the species name second, then the subspecies, and then the name of the scientist who named it. They are all underlined separately. They are going to be underlined separately if they are written, and if they are typed then they are going to be written in italics like this. They are mostly Latin or Greek. That's why to distinguish them from English we have to either type them in italics or we have to underline them. The main advantage of binomial nomenclature, why we use this two type of naming system, why we use the genus and species naming system, this is going to be helpful for us to avoid confusion. Say for example, the man, then same person, the same living organism like man is going to be having different names in different languages. Some can call them man, some can call them manav, some can call them manush. So all these different names are there. So to avoid confusions, the scientists have come to a conclusion that we can call them the Homo sapiens. So anyone in the world who may not belong to any particular language, it can be from any language. So even if their language is different, they can easily communicate with each other with this particular names, with these names of binomial nomenclature. So if you call it Homo sapiens, everyone in any scientist from any background can understand that. So to avoid confusion, we are using this universal naming system. That's the meaning of binomial nomenclature. Next, what are the aids for taxonomy? Here we are going to be using this 4 types of aids to understand taxonomy, to study taxonomy. To study taxonomy, we use either a herbarium or a museum. These two are the places where we are using dead organisms, where we are keeping dead organisms and studying them. Whereas botanical gardens and zoos are the places where the living organisms are kept. The herbarium is going to be having all the plants, dead plants. They are going to be preserved by drying and properly labeled and systematically arranged. They need to be properly labeled, and their labeling should be on the basis of whatever is constant, like their names and the region from they are found, the kind of other characteristics like the date, all these things which are constant, which cannot change. Whereas we can't write the height of the plant, because the height of the plant can vary between two plants even if they are from the same region. Next, we are going to be considering the museums. Museums are the places where the animals are kept, the dead animals are kept, and they are preserved in this kind of solution, 25% formalin and 75% ethanol. They are stored over here and they are going to be studied properly under this kind of conditions. The botanical gardens and zoos are the places where the living plants in botanical gardens and living animals in zoos are kept respectively so that the human beings can easily study them under proper control. Next, the meaning of taxonomical keys. They are the alternate characters for plants and animal identification. For example, if I write that a particular organism is eukaryotic, it is multicellular, it has mammary glands and hair all over the body, it has complex brain and bipedal in nature. So if this kind of points are given to us, this kind of points are known as the taxonomic keys. Now, and a person can easily identify from here that we may have been talking about the human beings or the Homo sapiens. So these are the taxonomical keys. It is nothing but different clues which are given, which the scientists can find out in a particular new organism and understand that where this particular organism should be there in the taxonomical hierarchy, and then accordingly they can place them in that classification, in that topic of classification, the name of classification. Okay, so for example, here if we see all these points, so these points tell us that it should be there in the domain Eukarya under the class Mammalia. Domain Eukarya under the kingdom, obviously we have to say the kingdom Animalia, then we have to say the order of the phylum, also we have to say the class. So all these things are going to be, these terms, these keys are going to be helping us to understand which particular taxonomical hierarchy a particular organism belongs to. Next, we are seeing the three systems of classification, that is artificial, natural and phylogenetic. In the artificial system of classification, the living organisms are classified on the basis of superficial similarities. For example, we can say the insects can fly and the birds can fly, so they should be grouped in one place. That is the meaning of artificial classification. Or say, for example, the animals hunt for food. Even the other organisms, they also depend on the protistas, they also depend on other organisms for food. So obviously they should be kept in one place. That is the artificial classification. Next, we have natural classification. Here we are going to be seeing the morphological and anatomical characteristic and cytochemical characteristics. For example, if I see the anatomy of an invertebrate, it is not going to be having a vertebral column, whereas a vertebrates has a vertebral column. So we are dividing into two types of organisms, one which has vertebral column and one which does not have vertebral column. So basically invertebrates and vertebrates. But these two, artificial, natural, they are not so specific or not so nice system of classification compared to the phylogenetic system of classification. In the phylogenetic system of classification, we not only study about the morphology, anatomy and cytochemistry, but we also need to consider a very important point, that is the evolution. If I find the evolutionary history, if I find that and then we try to classify it, then it becomes very nice and easy for us to classify. For example, we can see the apes and man are most related to each other compared to a man and monkey. So that is going to be helping us to understand the different characteristics of man and how they can be classified in which of the different taxonomical hierarchy we can put them. We can easily understand only if I study the phylogenetic relationship between them, that is the evolutionary relationship between them. So that's all about this chapter. This is the end of this chapter. Thank you.